What do you get when two of the entertainment world's brightest minds butt heads on live TV and the discussion turns in a direction no one could have foreseen? Tonight, we're dissecting the moment Danny DeVito and Stephen Colbert transitioned from good-natured badinage to incendiary argument that left the studio audience open-mouthed and the production staff running around. Before we dive in, be sure to subscribe and comment below what you really believe happened to cause this showdown, because this one's going to raise some questions. The Late Show set was ready as it would be for any other Tuesday evening. Stephen Colbert was seated at his desk sporting that signature smile, all set to introduce his guest. As soon as Danny DeVito emerged, the crowd went wild. Everybody adores Danny. He's the kind of guy who can make anyone laugh if he just enters the room. The applause continued for what seemed like hours as he walked up to the guest chair. Waving to the audience and beaming with a smile, Stephen rose up to welcome him, and they hugged each other, what appeared to be a genuine hug. Danny got into his seat, smoothing out his jacket, and Stephen started things off the way he always does, with a light comment regarding Danny's current project. Danny had come to pimp his new movie, a dark comedy about a retired mobster that tries to reconnect with his harangued daughter. Talk show fodder, right? That's what everyone thought. The first couple of minutes were exactly what you'd expect. Stephen asked if he'd seen the movie. Danny shared a humorous anecdote about filming with his co-star, and the audience guffawed in the proper spots. Danny discussed how he'd put on 20 pounds to play his part, gorging on pasta every day for 3 months. Stephen kiddingly said he wished he'd had that as an excuse, and Danny retorted with a wisecrack about Stephen's suit not looking quite so snug anymore. The crowd swallowed it whole. Everything was going along just fine. Then Stephen changed direction. He brought up something that Danny had recently said during an interview. Something about how comedy has evolved and how audiences don't like the same type of humor anymore. It seemed like an innocuous enough subject, the sort of thing they could make light of for a few minutes before getting on to the next topic. But you could see something shift in Danny's face. His smile didn't quite extend to his eyes anymore. Danny said, yeah, he'd said that and he meant it. He began to explain how comedy used to make risks, how comedians would push the envelope and audiences would push back or accept it. But either way, there was a dialogue being had now. He continued, everyone's so afraid of offending that comedy's lost its bite. Stephen nodded in agreement, but when you looked at his face, you could see he was choosing his next words with care. Stephen explained he knew that point of view. But didn't Danny believe that there was something worth having about being more careful with comedy? About realizing that words carry weight and perhaps some of those old parameters had to be stretched for good cause. The crowd gave a gentle clap. Obviously on Stephen's side of this particular one, Danny sat back in his chair and folded his arms. He added, that's just the issue. Everybody wishes to be thoughtful. Everybody wishes to be careful. And doing so, we've made comedy sanitized and safe. He added when he began his career, nobody cared about being thoughtful. They cared about being funny, and if someone got offended, well, that was part of the bargain. The vibe of the studio changed. You could feel it. The audience wasn't quite sure whether to laugh or remain silent. Stephen's smile became tighter. And he said, with all due respect to Danny, perhaps the old bargain wasn't for everybody. Perhaps some people were the butt of too many jokes and they're just asking not to be anymore. Danny uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. He said he wasn't discussing punching down. He never punched down. He was discussing risking, about trusting the audience to be smart enough to get context and nuance. He said the fallacy of what Stephen was proposing is that it presumes audiences are delicate, that they have to be protected from jokes, and that Danny said is insulting to everyone. Stephen replied at once. He said it's not about protecting anyone. It's about acknowledging that comedy does not happen in a bubble. He said, when you're someone with a platform, someone people listen to, you have a responsibility to think about what you're putting out there. The audience applauded again, louder this time. Danny shook his head. He said, responsibility is a funny word to use because it sounds noble, but what it really means is censorship. He said, once you start letting responsibility dictate your art, you don't have art anymore. You have propaganda. The crowd gasped. Some people began to murmur. Stephen's face went from good-natured argument to something harder. Stephen said that's a hell of a thing to say. He said calling thoughtful comedy propaganda is wrong, it's dangerous. He said there are real-world consequences to the kind of language Danny was using. And brushing those consequences off as oversensitivity is exactly the issue. His voice had an edge now, the kind you don't typically hear in him. Danny didn't waver. He said Stephen was illustrating his point. He said the fact that they couldn't even have this discussion without Stephen becoming defensive illustrates how broken the entire thing is. He said comedy is meant to make people uncomfortable sometimes. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. If everyone's comfortable, you're not doing your job. Stephen fired back and said, making people uncomfortable and making people feel dehumanized are two different things. He said Danny could cling to artistic freedom all he wanted. But at the end of the day, if your comedy makes someone feel less than human, you failed. You didn't push boundaries. You just hurt people. The crowd was dead silent now. This wasn't fun anymore. This wasn't two guys joking around on a talk show. This was something else altogether. Danny looked at Stephen for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer, but somehow sharper. He said, "It's interesting that Stephen would use the word failed because from where Danny was sitting, the real failure was pretending that comedy's job is to make everyone feel good. Comedy's role is to speak the truth, and the truth is not always easy. Stephen told the truth, as far as who is concerned, though? He said, Dai's truth may not be another person's truth, and pretending that there is one truth, one point of view that's authentic, is precisely the sort of thinking which led us into the fix we're in today." He said, "Art can speak the truth and be kind at the same time. It can be edgy and still be nice." Danny laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. He said, "Kindness and comedy is a contradiction." He said, "You can't be funny and kind at the same time because funny is based on tension, on conflict, on calling out what's ridiculous." He said Stephen's brand of comedy is just everyone agreeing with one another and calling it progressive. Stephen's jaw clenched. He said that's not what he was saying at all, and Danny knew that. He said there is a distinction between using comedy to build tension and simply being cruel to try to get a laugh. He said some of the funniest people he knows are also some of the kindest, and they find a way to be both because they know that comedy doesn't have to have a victim. Danny interrupted him. He said every joke does have a victim, even if Stephen doesn't want to acknowledge it. Someone is always the target of the joke. Whether it's a politician, a celebrity, an idea, a behavior, that's the basis of comedy. He said, "Pretending otherwise is just lying to yourself to feel better about what you do." Stephen said, "No, that's lazy thinking." He said, "Satire punches up at power, not down at people who are already struggling." He said, "There's a clear difference between mocking a corrupt politician and mocking someone for their identity." He said, "If Danny couldn't see the distinction, then maybe Danny hadn't been paying attention to how the world's changed." Danny's face reddened. He said, "Oh, he's been paying attention. He's been watching comedy die a slow death while everyone pats themselves on back for being so enlightened." He said, "Stephen sits behind the desk every night and makes the safest jokes possible. Jokes that his audience already agrees with and calls it bravery." He said, "At least when Danny tells a joke, there's a risk involved. At least people don't know what's coming." The audience was totally stunned. A couple of people exchanged nervous glances. One of the cameramen shifted his position, likely getting a better shot at what was becoming must-see television for all the wrong reasons. Stephen took a breath and you could see him trying to regain his composure. He said he admires Danny's career. He admires what Danny's achieved. But this notion that being offensive for offense's sake is somehow more real than attempting to be thoughtful. That's just not real. He said shock value isn't equivalent to substance. Danny leaned further forward, his hands clasped on the arms of his chair. He said Stephen wants to discuss substance. Let's discuss substance. He said Stephen's show is the same thing every night. Trump joke, Republican joke. Audience claps. Repeat. He said, there's no risk there. No actual challenge to the audience. It's just giving people what they want to hear. He said, that's not comedy. That's confirmation bias with a punchline. Stephen's face turned red now, too. He said, that's totally unfair, and Danny knows it. He said, yes, he discusses politics because politics are important. Because there are actual stakes to what's going on in the world. He stated, mocking powerful individuals who are actively hurting people is not lazy comedy. It's employing comedy as a form of accountability. Danny asserted, accountability, responsibility, thoughtfulness. Stephen's got all the buzzwords memorized. He stated, but at the end of the day, Stephen's not challenging anyone. He's preaching to the choir, and the choir appreciates it because they never have to question themselves. He stated, real comedy makes everyone uncomfortable, even the people who agree with you. Stephen stated, Danny's romanticizing discomfort like it's inherently valuable, and it's not. He stated, making people uncomfortable just to make them uncomfortable is pointless. It has to be in service of something, some greater truth or insight. Otherwise, it's just background noise. Danny stated, there he goes again with the rules. Comedy has to be in service of something. It has to have a purpose, he stated. That's the problem right there. Comedy doesn't have to do anything except be funny. The minute you add conditions, you kill it. Stephen said, no, you elevate it. He said, comedy with no purpose is merely meanness, and meanness isn't interesting. He said, Danny can label it authenticity or edge or whatever. but if it's just making people feel bad for nothing, it's useless. Denis rose up from his seat. The crowd gasped again, more loudly this time. Stephen looked absolutely shocked. Denis said he didn't come here to be lectured by a man who's lost sight of what comedy even is. He said Stephen's become exactly the type of person comedians use to make fun of. Someone so egotistical that he's lost all sense of humor. Stephen stood up to his hands on his desk. He said, "If Danny believes being funny means not bothering with who you hurt, then maybe Danny's the one who's forgotten something." He said, "Comedy's always been about more than just making people laugh. It's about relating to people, about common humanity, about seeing light in dark alleys." He told her, "Danny's idea of comedy just sounds lonely." That word lingered. Lonely. You could see it land on Denis. His look changed. Something flashed across his face, but rather than backing away, he doubled down. He told her, "At least lonely is honest." He told her, "Stephen's idea of comedy is just a popularity contest. Making sure everyone likes you, making sure you never say anything that might lose you a fan." He said, "That's not art. That's marketing." Stephen explained that giving a damn about your impact isn't marketing. It's being human. He told Denis he can wrap himself in this hard man old school comedian image all he likes, but it doesn't change the reality that words have consequences and actions have consequences, and pretending they don't is just cowardice masquerading as nostalgia. Di's voice dropped to a whisper but grew intense. He said cowardice. That's what Stephen believes this is. He said it takes a hell of a lot more guts to speak something you know half the room is going to despise than it does to speak something you know everyone is going to praise. He said Stephen wouldn't recognize courage if it slapped him in the face because he spent years creating a safe little echo chamber where everyone agrees with him. Stephen explained that's rich coming from a guy who spent the last 20 minutes bemoaning that comedy's too polite while having a tantrum on live TV because someone didn't agree with him. He said, "If Danny's so tough, if he's so edgy, why is he so offended by a simple conversation about being considerate?" The crowd uttered a unified noise, a gasp. Denis gestured toward Stephen. He explained that he wasn't offended. He's disappointed. He said he had expected more from Stephen. He believed Stephen had a clue what comedy was meant to be, but apparently he's drunk the Kool-Aid along with everybody else. He said it's a pity because Stephen used to be funny. Earlier, when he didn't care so much about being liked, Stephen's voice turned cold. He explained that he is still funny to people who are not anchored in the past. He said, "Maybe Di's problem isn't with modern comedy. Perhaps it's with the reality that the world's progressed and he hasn't." He said, "Audiences have matured. Comedy's developed. And Danny, they're questioning why no one's interested in hearing the same old tired routine anymore." Danny said, "There it is," he said, "that's what this is about." Stephen believes Danny's off the point. He told Stephen is sitting there in his suit with his safe jokes and his compliant audience thinking he's got the world figured out. But meanwhile, he's merely a puppet speaking what the network wants him to speak. Stephen called that ridiculous and insulting. He said no one tells him what to say. No one dictates his content. He said Danny's reaching for straws now because he realizes he's losing this debate. He said trying to slur Stephen's integrity doesn't make Di's argument any more true. Denis laughed once again. That same bitter laugh from earlier. He said losing the argument. That's what Stephen believes. He said, "This isn't a debate club. This is meant to be fun." But Stephen's so obsessed with being right that he's lost how to have a conversation. He insisted on everything being a moral crusade with Stephen. Everything's got to be a win or a loss rather than just conversing like to human beings. Stephen insisted they ceased having a conversation. The instant Danny chose to insult all Stephen stands for, he uttered Danny came on this program on Stephen's program and chose to utilize it as a platform to destroy the very foundation Stephen's based his career on. He uttered if Danny chose to discuss, he had ample chances to do so without being disrespectful. Danny uttered disrespectful, that's the magic word, isn't it? He stated, everybody's so afraid of being disrespectful now that nobody can ever say anything actual anymore. He stated Stephen desires respect, but he is not going to give it. He stated when Danny gave an opinion which Stephen did not agree with, Stephen made it a character assassination. Stephen stated no. He made it a values discussion. And Danny did not want to be challenged. He said Danny's so accustomed to everyone laughing at his humor and concurring with him that the moment anyone disagrees, he plays like he's being attacked. He said, that's not strength, that's fragility. Danny's voice rose again. He stated, fragility from the man who requires his whole room to be in agreement with him every evening or he disintegrates. He stated, Stephen can't tolerate anyone thinking otherwise than him. So, he makes them out to be problematic or old-fashioned or whatever other term makes him superior. He stated, At least Danny doesn't require continual validation from a group of strangers, Steven stated. This all began because Danny couldn't bear being questioned regarding his approach to comedy. He stated, Danny's the one who took this and made it a personal attack, turned a nice debate into something ridiculous. He stated, if anyone here requires validation, it's evidently Danny. Otherwise, why would he be so angry that someone disagrees with him? Danny stated he's angry because he's witnessing comedy die in front of his eyes, and no one appears to care. He continued, people like Steven are killing comedy with kindness, smothering it with good intentions until there's nothing left but dull, safe, approved material that nobody questions and doesn't mean anything. He said, when comedy's dead, Steven's going to wake up and realize he was part of the problem. Steven responded, comedy's not dying. It's changing. And Danny's angry because he's not changing along with it. He told me, each generation feels that the next one is destroying everything, but somehow the world goes round. He told me, comedy won't be in any trouble without Dai's permission or approval. Danny told me it was not about his approval, it was about the art form as a whole. He told me that comedy once meant something. It was once risky and unpredictable and alive. He told me now it's focus grouped and sanitized and stripped of all that made it matter. He told me Steven's a symptom of that disease, not the cure. Steven told me dangerous doesn't mean good and unpredictable doesn't mean valuable. He told me Danny keeps talking like the old way was better just because it was the old way. That's not an argument. That's just nostalgia. He said certain things needed to be changed. Certain lines needed to be redrawn. And not admitting that isn't bravery. It's obstinacy. Danny said obstinacy. Sure, he'll have obstinacy over cowardly any day, he said. Steven bends, wind at his back, changing what he says based on what's in this week, what's acceptable, what won't land him in hot water. He told me, that's not comedy, that's customer service. Steven's hands were trembling now. You could see it. He told me he doesn't tailor his content to what is acceptable. He tailors it to what's right. He told me there is a distinction between keeping up with trends and having principles. He told me Danny can ridicule those principles all day long, but at least Steven has them. Danny said principles. Is that what we're labeling it? He said, Steven's principles seem awfully convenient, always falling into line perfectly with whatever his audience wants to hear. He said, real principles cost you something. They make you unpopular sometimes. They put you at odds with people. He said, Steven's never at odds with anyone except people who were already his enemies. Steven replied that's because his principles are consistent. In contrast to Dai's so-called principle of simply saying whatever contentious thing comes into his head and presenting it as comedy, he explained that having principles doesn't equate to alienating everyone. It means you believe in something. He explained that Danny believes in nothing but himself. The crowd remained quiet, but now folks were fidgeting in their seats, uneasy with how intimate this had gotten. The producers must have been losing their minds in the control room trying to decide whether or not to go to commercial or let this ride. Danny explained that his ego, that's what Steven believes this is all about. He told him it's not about ego. It's about integrity. It's about not selling out every value you ever had in order to keep your job. He stated Steven is so afraid of losing his place, losing his audience, losing his validity that he'll do anything to make them happy. Steven replied he's not afraid of losing anything. He's afraid of turning into someone like Danny who's so resentful of the world evolving that he takes it out on everyone who's evolved. He stated Danny's not defending comedy. He's defending his own worldview. And those are two distinct things. Danny moved another step toward Steven's desk. He said adapted. That's a nice word for what Steven's done. He said surrendered would be closer. He said Steven gave up his voice, his edge, his capacity to surprise anybody, all in return for safety and approval. He said Steven's trade may be acceptable for him, but don't label it comedy. Steven told him he hasn't lost anything. He's changed. He told him change involves discarding things that are no longer useful, things that hurt more than they help. He told him Dai's holding on to a type of comedy that died for a reason, and no matter how much he screams at it, it isn't coming back. Danny told him extinct. There's that word again. He said Steven keeps using words like that to make it sound inevitable, like there's no choice in the matter. He said there is a choice and Steven chose wrong. He chose comfort over truth, safety over risk, popularity over substance. He said those choices have consequences, and one of those consequences is that Steven's show doesn't matter anymore. Steven's face went pale then red again. He said his show doesn't matter. Is that the position Danny's taking? He stated, millions of viewers watch nightly. Millions of viewers interact with the content, share it, talk about it. He stated, just because Danny disagrees with what Steven does doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Danny stated, numbers aren't equal to impact. He stated, yes, people watch, but what are they gaining from it? What are they learning? What's being challenged? What's changing in their minds? He stated, nothing. Because Stephen's not attempting to change minds. He's attempting to reinforce what everyone already believes. He explained that could be successful, but it's not significant. Stephen explained it's significant to the individuals who are watching, to the individuals who feel heard and seen and represented. He explained Danny's explanation of significant apparently revolves around whether or not it makes him feel something on a personal level. And that is extremely selfish. He explained comedy does not concern getting Danny's approval. Denise said no, it's all about truth. And Stephen wouldn't know truth if it came up and shook his hand. He said Stephen's truth is whatever is trendy, whatever is in style, whatever keeps the machine going. He said, real truth is uncomfortable and complicated and doesn't fit neatly into a 7-minute segment between commercials. Stephen said Danny's fixation on discomfort is telling. He said it's like Danny believes if it doesn't hurt, it isn't real. He said that's a sick way to look at the world. And no wonder Danny's so bitter all the time if that's his motto. Denise said he's not bitter all the time, he's bitter now because he's speaking with someone who has lost hope. He told Stephen conceited on comedy being anything more than a popularity contest. And now he's justifying that decision as if it was virtuous. He told there was nothing virtuous about taking the easy way out and acting as if it was the right thing to do. Stephen said the easy path would have been to keep making the same jokes Danny makes, to ignore the world changing around him, to never question whether what he was doing was actually helping or hurting. He said the hard path is listening, learning, adapting, and still finding ways to be funny. He said Danny chose easy and called it brave. Danny shook his head slowly. He said they're never going to get along with this. He said Stephen too far gone to dedicate it to this new style of comedy that's not comedy at all. He said it's been a real education though, watching how far a person can fall and still believe they flying. Stephen said the feeling's mutual. He explained that it's been a learning experience watching how one can be so gifted and squander it on bitterness and resentment. He explained that Danny could have used this opportunity to actually speak about his work, to hawk his film, to engage the audience, but he went ahead and burned bridges and made everyone uneasy for nothing. So, what do you think actually led to this eruption? Was it really about comedy and morals, or was there something more at play with these two? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe because we will be monitoring to see if either one of them brings this up again.